So there I was, sitting in the Pentagon briefing room, watching what had to be the most pretentious hologram in the history of the universe. General Vex'thar of the Zorillian Empire stood 12 feet tall, covered in shimmering purple scales, with 4 arms crossed in what I can only describe as cosmic condescension. His voice had that annoying quality of someone who thinks they invented intelligence. "Greetings, primitive humans," he began, and I swear I heard half the room groan. "I am General Vex'thar, Supreme Commander of the Zorillian Third Fleet. Your pathetic little planet has been selected for educational purposes." Educational purposes? Right, because nothing says education like threatening to blow up a planet. The general continued his cosmic TED Talk. "We have observed your species for exactly 47 of your planetary rotations. Your military tactics are quaint. Your technology is adorable. Your strategic thinking is approximately what we would expect from a species that still uses projectile weapons and chemical propulsion. I'm Corporal Jake Morrison, by the way. Friends call me Tank, mostly because I have the subtlety of an Abrams and the diplomacy skills of a hand grenade. Been a Marine for 8 years, seen 3 tours, and survived more bureaucratic briefings than any human should have to endure. But this was something special. Your surrender is not requested," Vex'thar announced with the tone of someone explaining basic math to a toddler. "It is inevitable. However, being a civilized species, we offer you a choice. Submit now, and your transition to our glorious empire will be gentle. Resist, and we will demonstrate why your military academy should have included courses on actual warfare." The hologram flickered, showing massive ships hanging in space like metallic thunderclouds. Each one looked like it could turn Manhattan into a parking lot without breaking a sweat. "You have 48 of your hours to consider this generous offer. During this time, I will personally visit your world too. How do you say, school you in the fundamentals of interstellar conflict? Consider it a final lesson before your graduation to a more enlightened existence under Zorillian rule." Ambassador Phillips, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy, cleared his throat. "General Vex'thar, surely we can discuss terms." "Terms?" The alien's laugh sounded like nails on a chalkboard mixed with the dying gasps of democracy. "Oh, small human, you misunderstand. This is not a negotiation. This is a lecture. I will arrive tomorrow to explain precisely why your resistance is not only futile but embarrassingly amateur." The hologram winked out, leaving us staring at empty air and existential dread. General Patterson rubbed his temples. "Options, people. What do we have?" "Well," said Colonel Hayes, "our nuclear arsenal would tickle them. Our conventional forces would probably make them laugh. And our space capabilities are roughly equivalent to throwing rocks at a hurricane." I raised my hand. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" "Morrison, now's not the time for." "That alien talks too much," I interrupted. "I've met drill sergeants with more humility. And something about his whole 'we studied you for 47 days' thing bugs me." 47 days? That's not even long enough to understand our coffee preferences, let alone our military doctrine. Admiral Chen looked interested. "What are you thinking, Corporal?" "I'm thinking maybe this general, whatever his name is, might be a little too confident for his own good. And in my experience, overconfident enemies make the best kind of stupid mistakes." The room fell silent. Outside, I could hear the distant hum of Washington traffic, probably the last normal sound we'd hear for a while. "All right, Morrison," General Patterson said. "You'll be part of the welcoming committee tomorrow. Let's see what this educational experience teaches us." I smiled. Time for school to be in session. The next morning, General Vex'thar made his grand entrance at Joint Base Andrews. And by grand entrance, I mean he materialized out of thin air in a swirl of purple energy that made everyone's fillings ache. His ship hovered overhead like a metallic middle finger pointed at gravity itself. "Ah, the welcoming committee," he said, looking at our assembled group with the enthusiasm of someone examining particularly boring insects. "How wonderfully primitive. Projectile weapons, chemical explosives, and is that seriously a knife on your belt, small human?" He was talking to me. Of course he was talking to me. "Yes, sir. It's a knife, I replied. We call it a Ka-bar, and carried by Marines since before your great-great-grandparents figured out which end of a laser goes pew. Ambassador Phillips shot me a look that could kill, but Vex'thar just chuckled. Charming. A blade weapon. We used similar tools approximately 3,000 years ago, during our own primitive phase. He gestured, and a holographic display materialized showing various alien weapons that looked like they'd been designed by someone who thought regular guns weren't scary enough. These are modern weapons, small human, energy-based, self-targeting, capable of adjusting their molecular disruption patterns based on the target's biological composition. Neat, I said. How's the battery life? The question seemed to catch him off guard for about half a second. Battery life is irrelevant. These weapons draw power from zero-point energy fluctuations in the quantum foam. Right. Of course they did. His companion, Commander Krill, stepped forward. If Vex'thar looked like a pompous lizard, Krill looked like a pompous lizard who'd spent way too much time in libraries. 3 eyes, tentacles instead of hair, and the kind of expression that suggested he'd memorized every military textbook ever written and was disappointed by all of them. Perhaps we should begin with basic tactical theory, Krill suggested in a voice that screamed, I have 17 advanced degrees and want everyone to know it. Your species appears to have developed combat doctrine based primarily on, what is the term, throwing things at each other very hard. It's worked pretty well so far, I pointed out. Has it? Vex'thar activated another hologram, this one showing various historical battles. Your species has been at war with itself for its entire recorded history. Your casualty rates are astronomical. Your resource expenditure is inefficient. And your tactical innovations consist primarily of finding new ways to make things explode. He wasn't wrong, but something about his tone made me want to punch him in his smug alien face. Observe, he continued. A properly conducted military engagement. The hologram showed alien forces moving in perfect coordination, weapons firing with mathematical precision, enemies being eliminated with clinical efficiency. Notice the calculated deployment patterns, the energy conservation protocols, the predictive targeting algorithms. This is warfare as it should be conducted by civilized beings. Ambassador Phillips nodded eagerly. Fascinating. Your tactical precision is truly remarkable. Indeed, Vex'thar preened. We have reduced warfare to a precise science. Every variable calculated, every outcome predicted, every contingency planned for. It is elegant. Sounds boring, I muttered. Boring? 4 alien eyes focused on me with laser intensity. Corporal Morrison, is it? Perhaps you would care to elaborate on why efficient combat doctrine strikes you as boring? Well, I said, it's just that war isn't really a math problem, is it? I mean, sure, logistics matter, supply chains matter, technology matters. But at the end of the day, it's people making decisions under pressure, and people are messy, unpredictable, and generally terrible at following the script. Krill made a sound that might have been laughter if laughter could be weaponized. Ah yes, the human factor. We studied this extensively. Your unpredictability is indeed notable, but it stems from inferior processing capabilities and emotional dysfunction, hardly an advantage. Maybe, I said. Or maybe you've been fighting the same kinds of enemies for so long that you've forgotten what happens when someone doesn't play by your rules. The 2 aliens exchanged what I can only describe as a condescending glance. Small human, Vex'thar said. We have conquered 47 star systems. Our military doctrine has proven successful against every conceivable form of resistance. Your quaint theories about unpredictability are adorable. I'm to see just how adorable I could be. The educational seminar continued for another hour, and my patience was wearing thinner than armor plating on a politician's promises. Vex'thar had moved on to explaining why human squad tactics were fundamentally flawed, while Commander Krill provided color commentary that sounded like a textbook having an argument with itself. Your typical human infantry unit, Vex'thar was saying, operates on what you call fire and movement, correct? One element provides covering fire while another advances. Primitive, but understandable for a species with limited cognitive processing. Limited cognitive processing? I repeated. Right. Indeed. Now observe how a properly coordinated Zorillian assault unit functions. The hologram showed alien troops moving in perfect synchronization, like a deadly ballet choreographed by a computer. Each warrior's actions are calculated to complement the others with mathematical precision. No wasted motion, no redundant positioning, no emotional decision-making. I raised my hand. Question. Yes, small human? What happens when one of your mathematically precise warriors gets shot in the face? Krill's tentacles twitched. Our combat doctrine minimizes casualties through superior positioning and predictive analysis. But what happens when someone does get shot in the face? I pressed. Do the other warriors recalculate their mathematical precision, or do they just stand there wondering why the equation doesn't balance anymore? Ambassador Phillips looked like he wanted to crawl under a rock and hide until the aliens went away. Corporal Morrison, perhaps we should. No, Vex'thar interrupted. This is educational. The small human raises an interesting point about adaptive response protocols. Commander Krill, would you care to address this concern? Krill straightened up like a professor who'd been asked his favorite question. Zorillian combat units operate with distributed processing capabilities. Each warrior maintains constant communication with the others through quantum-entangled neural networks. When one unit is compromised, the others instantly recalibrate their positioning and objectives. Sounds complicated, said a voice from behind me. I turned to see two of my squad mates had joined the party. Sergeant Ricky Santos, our demolitions expert, looked like he'd rather be anywhere else but had that resigned expression of someone who'd been voluntold for special duty. Next to him stood Corporal Lisa Kim, our sniper, who was studying the aliens with the cold professional interest of someone calculating windage and elevation. Ah, more students, Vex'thar said. Excellent. Perhaps you would care to demonstrate your primitive weapons for educational purposes? Ricky hefted his gear bag. Primitive? General, with respect, some of these primitive weapons have been perfecting the art of making things go boom for the better part of a century. There's something to be said for time-tested technology. It's time-tested, Krill repeated, making it sound like a particularly unpleasant disease. Yes, we observed your chemical explosives during our study period. Crude, inefficient, and remarkably unpredictable in their effects. Unpredictable can be useful, Lisa said quietly. She had that sniper's way of speaking where every word was measured and deliberate. Predictable enemies make predictable decisions. Predictable decisions make for easy targets. Vex'thar's laugh sounded like grinding gears. Easy targets? Small humans? You appear to misunderstand your situation. Your entire military doctrine is based on technologies we discarded millennia ago. Your weapons are toys. Your tactics are amateur exercises. Your strategic thinking is limited by biological constraints that we have long since overcome. He gestured, and the hologram shifted to show what looked like a space-age firing range. Perhaps a demonstration would be educational. We could arrange a simple tactical exercise. Your primitive methods against our modern warfare techniques. Consider it a final exam before your planet's graduation to a more civilized existence. I felt something click in my brain. That moment when you realize your opponent has just made their first real mistake. A demonstration, I said slowly. You mean like a war game? If you wish to call it that. Though the outcome would hardly be in doubt. What are the stakes? Ambassador Phillips nearly choked. Corporal Morrison, you can't be serious. Oh, I'm serious, I said, not taking my eyes off the general. If we're going to get schooled, might as well make it interesting. Vex'thar's 4 eyes gleamed with what I could only interpret as predatory amusement. Stakes? Very well. If your primitive tactics somehow succeed, we will reconsider our timeline for your planet's integration into our empire. And if we lose, then your education will be considered complete, and we will proceed with the originally scheduled planetary acquisition. I looked at Ricky and Lisa. Ricky shrugged and patted his demolitions bag. Lisa just nodded once, that tiny sniper nod that meant she was already calculating angles and distances. "All right, General," I said. "Class is in session." The tactical exercise was set up in a hastily cleared section of the Quantico training grounds. Vex'thar had his people create what he called a fair representation of modern combat conditions, which apparently meant a kill house obstacle course designed by someone who thought regular kill houses weren't horrifying enough. Holographic enemies materialized and vanished at random intervals. Energy barriers popped up to block sight lines. Automated defense systems tracked movement with the kind of precision that made you really appreciate the good old days when the worst thing shooting at you was another human with questionable aim. "The scenario is simple," Vex'thar announced to the gathered crowd of human military observers and alien spectators. "Your squad will attempt to neutralize a series of defensive positions using your primitive tactics and weapons. My forces will respond using standard Zorillian combat protocols." He gestured to a squad of his own warriors, each one looking like they'd stepped out of a science fiction movie's fever dream. Full body armor that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal, weapons that hummed with barely contained energy, and those unsettling multiple eyes that tracked movement with mechanical precision. To make this fair, Commander Krill added with barely concealed condescension, "We will limit ourselves to basic engagement protocols and use training-level power settings on our weapons." "How generous," Lisa muttered. I studied the course layout. It was designed like a funnel, with multiple choke points that would force us into predetermined kill zones. Classic military thinking, designed to channel the enemy into overlapping fields of fire. The kind of tactical setup that looked brilliant on paper and worked perfectly against opponents who followed the same rulebook. "Questions before we begin this educational exercise?" Vex'thar asked. I raised my hand. "Just one. Do we have to follow your rules?" "Rules?" Proper tactical doctrine, logical advancing techniques, mathematically precise positioning, all that civilized warfare stuff you were talking about." Krill's tentacles writhed in what might have been confusion. "You may employ whatever primitive tactics you deem appropriate. The outcome will remain the same." "Perfect." I turned to my squad. "Gentlemen, lady, time for some improper tactical doctrine." Ricky grinned and started pulling things out of his demolitions bag that definitely weren't in any official manual. Lisa disappeared into the terrain with that spooky sniper ability to become invisible in plain sight. I hefted my rifle and started walking toward the course entrance. "Corporal Morrison," Ambassador Phillips called out. Perhaps a more cautious approach would be. "Ambassador," I called back. "With all due respect, caution is what got us into this mess. Time to try something different." The first defensive position was a textbook setup. Elevated firing position, clear sight lines, overlapping coverage from supporting positions. The kind of thing any military academy graduate would recognize immediately and respond to with proper flanking maneuvers and coordinated suppression fire. Instead, I walked straight at it. The alien defenders seemed confused by this development. Their weapons tracked my movement, but they hesitated. I could almost see their tactical processing systems trying to figure out why I wasn't taking cover or calling for supporting fire. "Is the human malfunctioning?" I heard one of them ask through their communication system. "Negative. Analyzing behavioral patterns." While they were analyzing, I kept walking. 20 meters. 15. 10. At 5 meters, I dove sideways into a roll just as their weapons opened fire. Energy bolts scorched the air where I'd been standing, but by then I was already moving, using their moment of confusion to get an angle on their position. 2 quick rifle shots took out their primary gunner. Not kill shots, obviously, since this was a training exercise, but solid hits that would have been lethal with real ammunition. "Unconventional approach detected," the remaining defender reported, requesting tactical guidance. "Maintain defensive posture," came Krill's voice. "The human is simply desperate." Desperate. Right. While they were maintaining their defensive posture, Ricky had been busy doing what demolitions experts do best. The controlled explosion that took out the second position wasn't large, but it was precisely placed and absolutely devastating to their carefully planned defensive arrangement. "What was that?" Vex'thar demanded. "Improvised engineering," Ricky called back cheerfully. The third position never saw Lisa coming. One moment their sniper was scanning for targets. The next moment he was down with a training round through his scope. She'd moved to a position that shouldn't have existed according to their tactical analysis, using terrain features that their advanced sensors had dismissed as irrelevant. We'd cleared 3 defensive positions in about 4 minutes using methods that violated every principle of proper military doctrine they'd just finished explaining to us. "This is," Krill started. "Educational?" I suggested. The alien squad was regrouping, their perfect coordination starting to look a little frayed around the edges. They were trying to adapt to tactics that didn't make sense according to their mathematical models. "Fascinating," Vex'thar said, and for the first time he didn't sound condescending. He sounded genuinely puzzled. "Your approach is highly inefficient and tactically unsound, yet somehow effective." "Welcome to humanity," I said. "We specialize in making the impossible look easy and the easy look impossible." The demonstration was just getting started. What happened next probably violated several laws of physics, multiple military regulations, and at least 3 Geneva Convention protocols that hadn't been written yet. Ricky had apparently decided that if we were going to demonstrate primitive human tactics, we might as well demonstrate them with style. The 4th defensive position was supposed to be impregnable. Energy shields, automated turrets, overlapping fields of fire, and enough processing power to calculate every possible angle of attack. It was a perfect example of Zorillian military engineering, designed to stop any rational assault cold. Unfortunately for them, rational wasn't really our specialty. "Lisa," I called out, "can you see their command post?" "Affirmative." "Range 800 meters, elevated position, multiple observers." "Think you can make them duck?" "Roger that." While Lisa was making the alien command staff suddenly develop a healthy respect for cover, Ricky was implementing what he cheerfully called percussive maintenance on their defensive systems. Turns out, even advanced alien technology has a hard time functioning properly when someone drops a satchel charge on its power coupling. "This is not standard tactical doctrine," Commander Krill was saying into his communication device. His voice had lost that confident professorial tone and picked up a distinctly worried quality. "No kidding," I replied, popping up just long enough to put 2 training rounds into his position's sensor array. "Standard tactical doctrine assumes your enemy is going to play by the same rules you are." The alien defenders were trying to adapt, but their perfect coordination was working against them. They kept waiting for orders, for tactical analysis, for their distributed processing network to calculate the optimal response. Meanwhile, we were just making it up as we went along. I watched one of their warriors pause in the middle of a firefight, clearly receiving instructions through their quantum-entangled neural network or whatever technobabble they used for radio. While he was listening to his orders, I shot him with a paint round. "Lesson 1," I called out to Vex'thar. "Sometimes the best tactical decision is the one you make in the next 3 seconds, not the one you calculate over the next 3 minutes." Another explosion echoed across the training ground as Ricky introduced their automated defense grid to the concept of creative demolition. "Lesson 2, Ricky added cheerfully, "complex systems have complex failure modes." Lisa's voice crackled over our radio. "Target acquired. Multiple hostiles advancing on your position using predictable flanking maneuver Delta 7. "Delta 7? I asked. "It's in their manual. Page 243. I've been reading over their shoulders." That was Lisa for you. While everyone else was watching their weapons, she was watching their tactics. "Light them up," I said. The flanking maneuver collapsed in a hail of precisely placed training rounds. The alien warriors seemed genuinely confused about how their textbook perfect tactical approach had been countered so effectively. "General Vex'thar," I called out, "question for you." "What is it, small human?" His voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "How many different species have you conquered?" 47 star systems, as I mentioned. Right, but how many different species? Because something tells me they all had advanced technology, mathematical precision, and really impressive tactical manuals. There was a pause. Most developed civilizations follow similar strategic principles. Most, I repeated. But what happens when you run into someone who hasn't read the manual? The final defensive position was supposed to be their ace in the hole. A combination of everything they'd shown us, plus some additional surprises that were supposed to demonstrate the futility of primitive human tactics. Instead, it turned into a clinic on why overconfidence is the most dangerous enemy you can face. While their weapons tracked our last known positions, we'd already moved to places their sensors said were impossible. While their tactical systems calculated our most likely next moves, we were doing things their programming hadn't accounted for. While their distributed processing network shared perfectly accurate information about what we should be doing, we were busy doing something else entirely. The whole thing fell apart in about 6 minutes. When the smoke cleared, literally in some cases, the Zorillian demonstration squad was scattered across the training ground, marked with paint rounds and looking like they'd just discovered that their perfectly calibrated understanding of warfare had some significant gaps. Vex'thar stood in the middle of it all, his 4 eyes blinking in what I could only interpret as shocked disbelief. "This is," he started. "Impossible?" I suggested. "According to your tactical analysis?" "Highly improbable," Commander Krill corrected weakly. "The mathematical models clearly indicate." "Commander," I interrupted, "with all due respect, your mathematical models just got their butts kicked by 3 humans with attitude problems and surplus equipment." The alien observers were chattering among themselves in their incomprehensible language, but their tone was pretty universal. That's the sound of people trying to figure out what the hell just happened. "I believe," I said to General Vex'thar, "it's time for the final lesson." General Vex'thar looked like someone had just explained to him that 2 + 2 might occasionally equal fish, depending on your perspective and the tactical situation. His perfect military bearing had developed a distinct slump, and his condescending smile had been replaced by the expression of someone reconsidering some fundamental assumptions about the universe. "I do not understand," he said finally. "Your tactics were illogical. Your equipment is primitive. Your coordination was minimal. By every standard metric of military effectiveness, you should have failed completely." "Should have," I agreed, "but didn't." Commander Krill was running diagnostics on his equipment, apparently convinced that superior alien technology couldn't possibly have been defeated by inferior human methods. "There must be some error in our assessment protocols," he muttered. "No error," Lisa said, materializing from wherever snipers go when they're not being seen. "Just incomplete data." Vex'thar turned those 4 eyes on her with desperate hope. "Explain." "You studied us for 47 days, she continued in that measured sniper voice. 47 days of watching our official military exercises, reading our published tactical manuals, analyzing our documented combat operations. You learned everything there is to know about how humans are supposed to fight." "And?" Krill asked eagerly. "And you completely missed how humans actually fight when the supposed to doesn't work anymore." I walked over to where Ambassador Phillips was standing, looking like he'd just watched the laws of physics file for divorce. "Ambassador, you've been in enough negotiations to know that the most important thing about any opponent is figuring out what they can't imagine." "What they can't imagine?" "Right, these guys," I gestured at the aliens. "They've conquered 47 star systems. 47 civilizations that probably had better technology than us, more advanced tactics, superior strategic thinking. But I'm betting every single one of those civilizations thought like they do." Ricky was packing up his gear, looking satisfied with the day's work. "Logical. Predictable. Mathematical. The kind of enemies who read the same textbooks and follow the same rules." "Exactly," I said. "But we don't follow the rules because half the time we don't even know what the rules are supposed to be. We just figure it out as we go along, and we've been doing that for our entire history." Vex'thar was starting to look like he was getting it. "Your unpredictability is not a deficiency." "Nope, it's a feature. Every human conflict has been against other humans, and humans are sneaky, stubborn, creative, and generally impossible to predict. We've been training against the most unpredictable enemy in the galaxy our entire existence. Ourselves, the general said quietly. Ourselves, I confirmed. Every dirty trick, every desperate gambit, every impossible last stand, every time someone looked at a hopeless situation and said, "Hold my beer," we've been there. We've done that. We've survived it. Commander Krill was staring at his tactical displays like they'd personally betrayed him. But the mathematical models clearly showed. "Commander," I interrupted, "your mathematical models are built on the assumption that your enemies will behave rationally. They'll make logical decisions, follow predictable patterns, and respond to threats in mathematically optimal ways." "Yes, of course. Any civilized species would. Any civilized species that thinks like you would. But what happens when you're fighting someone who looks at your mathematically optimal defense and decides to punch it in the face instead of finding the logical weakness?" Lisa smiled, which was a rare enough occurrence to make everyone pay attention. "Or when they decide the best way to deal with your perfect flanking maneuver is to booby-trap it and go have coffee while you walk into your own ambush." Or, Ricky added cheerfully, when they realize that your advanced technology probably costs more than their entire annual budget, so they don't mind trading a $20 explosive for $1 million sensor array. The implications were starting to sink in. I could see it in Vex'thar's expression, the dawning realization that maybe, just maybe, conquering humanity wasn't going to be the educational experience he'd planned. "General," I said, "you wanted to school us in the fundamentals of interstellar conflict. But here's the thing about fundamentals, they work great until you run into someone who's willing to ignore them completely." Vex'thar looked around at his scattered forces, his damaged equipment, and his thoroughly shaken worldview. "This changes many things." "It should," I said. "Because if 3 humans with surplus equipment and attitude problems can do this to your tactical doctrine in a training exercise, imagine what 3 billion humans with a really bad attitude can do when you threaten their planet." The silence stretched out for a long moment. Then Vex'thar straightened up, some of his earlier composure returning. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "the timeline for your planet's integration into our empire requires further study." "Much further study," Commander Krill added quickly. I grinned. "Take all the time you need, General. We'll be here being unpredictable." As the aliens began beaming back to their ship, Vex'thar paused. "Corporal Morrison, one final question." "Shoot." "In your professional military opinion, how long would it take to properly study human tactical capabilities?" I looked at Ricky, who was still grinning about his demolitions work. I looked at Lisa, who was already calculating sight lines to their ship. I thought about every desperate, impossible, brilliant, and absolutely insane thing humans had done in the name of winning fights they couldn't win. "General," I said, "you'd better pack a lunch. It's going to be a long semester."